Captain James Chen stood before the Galactic Council, his German shepherd, Max, sitting calmly at his side. The massive chamber stretched upward into darkness, filled with representatives from hundreds of worlds. Each alien species had sent their finest diplomats to welcome humanity into the greater galactic community. James felt the weight of his species' future pressing down on his shoulders. He had rehearsed his speech 1,000 times, practiced every gesture, prepared for every possible question. What he had not prepared for was the laughter. It started as a low chittering from the Velcrin section, a species that resembled giant mantises with crystalline wings. Then the Orthani joined in, their trunk-like appendages swaying as they made a sound like grinding stones. Within moments, the entire council chamber echoed with alien amusement. James felt his face grow hot. Max shifted beside him, ears perked up and alert. Ambassador Thexlar of the Velcrin delegation floated forward, his wings catching the light and scattering rainbow patterns across the floor. His translator device crackled to life. "Forgive us, Captain Chen. We mean no disrespect to your species. It is just that we have never encountered a sentient race that brings lower life forms to formal diplomatic proceedings." James looked down at Max, whose tail had begun a slow, uncertain wag. "This is Max. He's my companion. On Earth, we call them dogs. Many humans have animal companions. We call them pets." The word pets seemed to trigger another wave of amusement. A Zorgothi representative, whose body was composed of what looked like living liquid metal, rippled with what James assumed was laughter. "You keep non-sentient creatures in your living spaces? For what purpose? Food storage?" "No," James replied, keeping his voice steady. "For companionship, for love, for friendship." This statement brought the loudest reaction yet. The Orthani ambassador, a massive creature named Gorseth, leaned forward on his support platform. "Love? You claim to feel love for a creature that cannot even speak? That cannot contribute to your society? That exists only to consume your resources?" James felt anger rising in his chest, but he pushed it down. Humanity needed this alliance. Earth needed access to galactic trade routes, to advanced technology, to the protection that came with council membership. He could not afford to lose his temper on the first day. "Dogs and other pets give us more than you might understand. They provide emotional support, companionship, and yes, love. The relationship between humans and their pets has existed for thousands of years." Thexlar's antennae twitched in what James had learned was the Velcrin equivalent of a dismissive gesture. "How primitive. In our observations of your planet, we noted that humans keep many different species as these pets, small furry creatures, reptiles, birds, and various others. You imprison them in your dwellings for your own amusement." "They're not imprisoned," James protested. "Most pets are happy. They're well cared for, fed, given medical attention, and loved." "Inefficient," Gorseth rumbled. "Every calorie spent on these useless creatures is a calorie wasted. Every moment spent in their care is a moment lost from productive activity. The Orthani eliminated such frivolous practices 12,000 years ago. We became stronger for it." Max whined softly, sensing James's distress. Without thinking, James reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears. Max leaned into his hand, and James felt some of his tension ease. This simple gesture, this moment of connection, was lost on the assembled aliens. The council's first speaker, a wispy being of pure energy contained in a crystalline shell, floated to the center of the chamber. "Let us move past this amusing cultural quirk. Captain Chen, humanity's application for provisional council membership will be processed. However, we must insist that for future formal gatherings, you leave your pet behind. It is unseemly." James wanted to argue, but he simply nodded. "Understood, first speaker." Over the following weeks, James and the rest of the human delegation worked tirelessly to establish Earth's place in the galactic community. He quickly learned that humanity's love of pets was a constant source of mockery. In casual conversations, during breaks in negotiations, even in formal dinners, aliens would make jokes about the silly humans who kept useless animals. Chen met with Ambassador Elena Rodriguez in their shared quarters one evening. She had brought her cat Luna, a sleek black feline who regarded the universe with suspicious yellow eyes. Elena scratched Luna's chin while reviewing diplomatic reports on her tablet. "They're never going to take us seriously," Elena said, not looking up from her reading. "The Kishari ambassador actually asked me today if humans were mentally deficient because we waste resources on decorative animals." James sat down heavily, and Max immediately laid his head on James's knee. The simple gesture of affection made him smile, despite his frustration. "We can't change thousands of years of human culture just to appease alien sensibilities. Pets are part of who we are." "I know," Elena said, "but it's going to be a problem. The council is voting next month on our full membership application. If they see us as primitive or foolish because of our pets, we might not get enough votes." Luna suddenly sat up straight, her ears swiveling toward the door. A moment later, someone knocked. James called out permission to enter, and a young officer named David Park stepped inside. He looked worried. "Sirs, we have a situation. The Velcrin delegation has filed a formal complaint. Apparently, someone's dog got loose in the residential sector and scared some of the Velcrin younglings. They're demanding we send all pets back to Earth immediately." James felt his stomach drop. "Which dog? Who was the handler?" "It was Lieutenant Morrison's golden retriever, Buddy. Morrison swears he was in his kennel, but somehow the lock opened. The dog didn't hurt anyone, just ran up to the Velcrin kids wanting to play, but they're not used to animals, and they panicked." Elena set Luna down gently. "This is exactly what we didn't need. The vote is in 3 weeks." The situation escalated quickly. Within days, the council passed an emergency resolution. All Earth animals were to be confined to the human residential sector. Any animal found outside that area would be immediately euthanized. The word the translator used was eliminated, but the meaning was clear enough. Humans protested, but they had no voting power yet. The resolution passed unanimously among all current member species. James stood in the station's observation deck, looking out at the stars. Max sat beside him, oblivious to the political firestorm his mere existence had caused. Other humans had gathered there too, many with their own pets. A woman held a small rabbit. A man had a parrot on his shoulder. A teenager sat with a border collie. "They don't understand," the woman with the rabbit said softly. "They see Snowflake here as just an animal. They don't see how she helps with my anxiety, how she gives me something to care for when everything feels overwhelming." The man with the parrot nodded. "Captain Chen, is there really nothing we can do? Are we just going to accept that the price of joining the galactic community is giving up our companions?" James didn't have an answer. He had spent his entire career working toward this moment, toward bringing humanity into the stars. But at what cost? He thought about the millions of pet owners on Earth, about the countless dogs and cats and birds and rabbits and hamsters and fish and reptiles that filled human homes with life and love. Could he really ask humanity to give that up? Max pressed against his leg, and James felt the familiar comfort of his presence. He had gotten Max as a puppy 8 years ago, right after his wife died. The dog had helped him through the darkest period of his life. Max didn't care that James sometimes couldn't sleep, that he sometimes stared at the wall for hours, that he sometimes cried for no apparent reason. Max just loved him, unconditionally and without judgment. "No," James said quietly, "we're not giving up our pets. We'll find another way." But as the days passed, finding another way seemed increasingly impossible. The council had made their position clear. Pets were a liability, a sign of humanity's primitive nature. Some of the more hostile species suggested that humans might not be ready for galactic citizenship at all. If humans couldn't even understand the inefficiency and foolishness of keeping useless animals, How could they be trusted with important decisions affecting trillions of galactic citizens? James lay awake in his quarters one night, Max snoring softly on the floor beside his bed. He thought about all the arguments he had made, all the explanations he had tried to give. Nothing had worked. The aliens simply could not understand why humans would choose to share their lives with other species. To them, it was a waste, a frivolity, a sign of weakness. Perhaps they were right, James thought in his darkest moment. Perhaps holding on to pets was holding humanity back. Perhaps the price of the stars was leaving behind the creatures that had walked beside humans for so long. But even as he thought it, he knew he couldn't accept it. There had to be another way. The next morning, James called a meeting of all the human delegation. 32 people crowded into the conference room, and many had brought their pets despite the rules about keeping them in residential areas. James looked around at the dogs, cats, birds, and other creatures that humans had brought to the stars with them. "We need to make a decision," he said. "The vote on our membership is in 2 weeks. The council has made it clear that our pets are a problem. Some members want us to prove our commitment by sending all animals back to Earth before the vote. I need to know what everyone thinks we should do." The room erupted in discussion. Some argued for compliance, saying that Earth's future was more important than individual pet ownership. Others refused to even consider it, saying that giving up their companions was a betrayal of what made humans human. The argument went in circles for hours. Finally, Elena stood up. Luna was draped across her shoulders like a living scarf. "I think we're asking the wrong question. We're acting like this is a choice between pets and the stars. But maybe it's not. Maybe the question is whether we want to join a galactic community that demands we give up part of what makes us human. And if so, what else will they ask us to give up in the future?" Her words hung in the air. James realized she was right. This wasn't just about pets. It was about whether humanity would maintain its identity among the stars, or slowly erase everything that made it unique in order to fit in. The decision was made to keep the pets, regardless of the consequences. James prepared a speech defending humanity's right to maintain its cultural practices, even ones the council found strange. He spent days refining his arguments, finding ways to explain the bond between humans and animals in terms the aliens might understand. But he knew in his heart that words alone wouldn't change minds that had already been made up. Then everything changed. It started with a small tremor that ran through the massive space station. James was in his quarters reviewing his speech when the first alarm sounded. Max jumped to his feet immediately, hackles raised, growling at something James couldn't sense. The intercom crackled to life with an urgent message in a dozen languages. "All personnel to emergency stations. Unknown vessels approaching. This is not a drill." James rushed to the command center, Max running at his heels despite regulations. The massive view screen showed dozens of ships emerging from quantum fold space. They were unlike anything in the Council's databases. Dark and angular, with a predatory design that sent chills down James's spine. The Orthani Defense Coordinator, Commander Rao Thon, was already coordinating the station's defenses. "What are we looking at?" James asked, sliding into an auxiliary station. Rao Thon's trunk-like appendages moved rapidly across holographic controls. "Unknown hostiles. They appeared without warning, no identification signals, no communication attempts. They're jamming our long-range communications. We can't call for help." The station shuddered as the first weapons fire struck the shields. James watched the displays as the unknown ships moved with frightening coordination. Council defense vessels launched to intercept, but the attackers cut through them like they were made of paper. Within minutes, it was clear that the station was in serious danger. "All non-essential personnel are ordered to evacuation pods," the first speaker's voice echoed through the station. "Defense personnel will buy you as much time as possible. Go now." James hesitated only a moment before joining the flood of aliens heading toward the evacuation centers. Max stayed close to his side, moving through the panicked crowd with surprising grace. All around him, James could hear the sounds of fear in 100 different languages and forms. The Velcrin were making high-pitched shrieking sounds. The Orthani were bellowing. Even the normally calm Zorgothi were rippling with agitated patterns. The evacuation center was chaos. Thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds were all trying to board limited pods. Arguments broke out about priority. Some species claimed their diplomatic status entitled them to first evacuation. Others argued their biological needs made them more vulnerable. The evacuation coordinators, overwhelmed by the panic, were losing control of the situation. James saw Elena across the crowded space, Luna clutched tightly in her arms. He also spotted David Park with his beagle, several other human personnel with their pets. They had all violated protocol by bringing their animals, but in the face of death, protocol seemed meaningless. James pushed through the crowd toward the human section, but then he noticed something strange. While the aliens around him were consumed by panic, the humans with pets seemed calmer, more focused. They were scared, yes, but they weren't losing control. Another massive impact rocked the station. The lights flickered and several sections of the ceiling collapsed. Screaming intensified, and the organized evacuation descended into a stampede. Aliens shoved and clawed at each other, desperate to reach the pods. James saw a young Velcrin get trampled, its crystalline wings shattering under the press of bodies. The evacuation coordinators abandoned their posts, joining the panic. Then Max did something unexpected. He barked, loud and sharp, cutting through the chaos. Other dogs in the area joined in, and suddenly the attention of hundreds of aliens turned toward the sounds. For a moment, the panic paused as everyone looked at the strange earth creatures making such noise. In that moment of stillness, Elena's voice rang out. "Everyone, calm down. Form lines. We'll get everyone out, but not if we kill each other first." Other humans took up the call, organizing the aliens around them. The beings nearest to humans with pets seemed to respond better, as if the animal's presence provided some kind of anchor of calm in the chaos. James watched in amazement as order began to emerge from the panic. The dogs seemed to sense what was needed, moving among the frightened aliens without aggression, just presence. A small Kisari child had become separated from its parent in the chaos, crying in distress. Max walked up to the child and gently nuzzled it, making soft sounds. The child stopped crying and reached out to touch Max's fur. A moment later, the Kisari parent found them, staring in shock at the human animal comforting their offspring. James helped reunite them and guided them toward an evacuation pod. The station shook again, more violently this time. Ralthon's voice came over the intercom, strained with effort. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. Defense grid failing. All evacuation pods must launch immediately." James realized with horror that there weren't enough pods for everyone. The station had been designed to hold 50,000 beings, but it currently hosted almost twice that number due to the special council session. Even with perfect organization, thousands would be left behind. He looked around at the aliens still waiting, at his fellow humans, at the pets that had somehow helped bring order to chaos. Someone had to stay behind to coordinate the final evacuations. Someone had to make sure the pods launched properly, that every available space was used. Someone had to be last. Elena met his eyes across the room, and he saw that she had come to the same conclusion. So had David and several other human officers. They began moving through the crowd, guiding aliens to pods, maximizing every available space. Max and the other animals seemed to understand the urgency, helping to keep everyone calm and moving. James marveled at how the pets that had been mocked as useless were now helping save lives. A pod filled with Orthani was having technical difficulties, refusing to launch. James rushed over to find the problem, his fingers flying over the control panel, while Max kept the nervous Orthani calm with his presence. The issue was a sensor malfunction, easy enough to override manually, but it took precious minutes during which another pod could have launched. James finally got it working and watched it shoot away from the dying station. The evacuation continued for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 30 minutes. The station was coming apart around them. Fires burned in several sections, despite the automated suppression systems. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of melting metal. The unknown attackers continued their assault, seemingly determined to destroy the station completely. Finally, only a few dozen beings remained, mostly humans who had stayed behind to help coordinate. James did a quick count. One evacuation pod left, designed for 20 occupants. 43 beings remained on the station, including 12 humans and their 8 pets. The math was simple and brutal. "The humans will stay," James announced. His voice was steady despite the fear in his heart. "The rest of you, into the pod, now." The remaining aliens, a mix of species, stared at him in shock. Thexlar was among them, the Velcrin ambassador who had first mocked Max. "You would sacrifice yourselves for us? After how we treated you?" "Yes," James said simply. "Now go. We don't have time for debate." But Max had other ideas. The German shepherd suddenly ran to the pod and jumped inside, barking urgently. Then he ran back out and did it again, as if demonstrating something. Luna followed his lead, darting into the pod and then back out. Other pets joined in, and James suddenly understood what they were trying to show. The pods were designed for council species, most of whom were larger than humans. But humans were compact, and pets even more so. "Everyone in," Elena commanded. "Humans and aliens together. We can fit if we squeeze." It seemed impossible, but they tried anyway. The aliens climbed into the pod, and humans filled in the gaps around them, pets settling into any available space. It was crushing, uncomfortable, and violated every safety protocol. But when the last human squeezed in, the pod door closed and sealed. James, pressed between an Orthani and a Velcrin, with Max somehow squeezed onto his lap, felt a surge of hope. The pod launched just as the station's main reactor went critical. Through the small viewport, James watched the massive structure that had been humanity's first step into galactic society tear itself apart in a silent explosion of light and debris. The escape pod drifted in space, its emergency beacon broadcasting on all frequencies. Inside the cramped interior, 43 beings and 8 animals waited in uncomfortable silence. The life support system was designed for 20 occupants, not this many. James did the calculations in his head and didn't like the results. They had maybe 12 hours of breathable air if they were lucky. Less if anyone panicked and started hyperventilating. Max rested his head on James's lap, and the simple gesture helped steady his nerves. Around him, he could hear the labored breathing of various species, the whisper of recycled air through overtaxed filters, the occasional whimper or click of distress. But no one was panicking. The animals seemed to have a calming effect on everyone in the pod, even the aliens who had mocked them days earlier. Thexlar's translator crackled in the darkness. "Captain Chen, I must apologize. I judged your species harshly for keeping these creatures, but your Max helped save my daughter today. She was the youngling who was trampled. Your animal stood over her and protected her from the crowd until I could reach her." James felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I'm glad she's safe. Is she in another pod?" "Yes, one of the first to launch. You humans organized the evacuation of the children first. That is not standard protocol in council operations. Protocol dictates that senior officials evacuate first to preserve command structure." Elena's voice came from somewhere to James's left. "We do things differently. On Earth, children are our first priority in any emergency. Always." Another voice joined in, one of the Orthani. James recognized it as Gorseth, the ambassador who had declared pets inefficient. "Your animals remained calm during the attack. They helped others stay calm. Even now, in this confined space, they provide comfort. I was wrong to call them useless. I see now they serve a purpose I did not understand." "They're not just useful," James said quietly. "They're family, but I appreciate that you're trying to understand." The hours crawled by in the darkness. The pod's emergency lighting had failed, leaving them in nearly complete blackness. James could hear Max's breathing, feel the warmth of the dog's body against his own. It was a comfort he hadn't realized he needed. Around him, other humans were whispering to their pets, drawing strength from their presence. 10 hours into their drift, the air had become noticeably thin. James could feel the beginning of hypoxia setting in, a light-headed sensation that made it hard to focus. Some of the aliens were struggling more than others. The Chishari had a higher oxygen requirement than most species, and they were suffering. One of them was making distressed sounds, his breathing rapid and shallow. David's voice cut through the darkness. "Hey, buddy, come here. That's it. You can pet him. His name is Charlie. He's friendly." James couldn't see what was happening, but he heard the Chishari's breathing begin to slow, as the beagle apparently offered comfort. Panic used up oxygen faster than calm, and keeping everyone calm was now a matter of life and death. The pets were doing more than just providing emotional support. They were actively helping everyone survive. 11 hours in, Luna started making sounds. Not distress sounds, but alert sounds. Elena shushed her gently, but the cat persisted, becoming more insistent. Then Max lifted his head and growled softly. His ears perked towards something James couldn't sense. Other animals in the pod began reacting similarly. "Something's wrong," James said. "The animals are sensing something. Or they're just distressed like the rest of us," one of the Valkyns said weakly. But then James felt it, a subtle vibration through the pod's hull. The animals had sensed it first, their more acute senses picking up something the technology and the occupants had missed. A moment later, lights flooded into the pod as something large moved alongside them. Through the viewport, James saw a ship, but not one of the attackers. This was a Council rescue vessel. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. The rescue ship's crew, shocked to find so many survivors in a single pod, worked quickly to get everyone aboard. Oxygen masks were distributed. Medical personnel rushed to treat those suffering from hypoxia and injuries. James found himself on a medical bed with Max lying on the floor beside him, refusing to leave. A Velcrin doctor examined him, her movements precise and professional. "You are lucky to be alive, Captain Chen. That pod should not have held so many occupants. The carbon dioxide levels were approaching lethal concentrations. Another hour and you would all have been dead." James nodded, too exhausted to speak. Around him, the other survivors were receiving similar care. He watched as medical personnel worked on aliens and humans alike, and he noticed something he wouldn't have seen before the attack. The doctors treating humans seemed more respectful now, more careful, and they were working around the pets without complaint, even when the animals refused to leave their human sides. Over the next few days, as more survivors were recovered and the full scope of the disaster became clear, the story of what happened in Evacuation Center 3 began to spread. The aliens who had been there told of how the humans and their pets had brought order to chaos, how the animals had kept everyone calm, how the humans had sacrificed their own safety to save others. The tale grew with each retelling, but the core truth remained unchanged. The unknown attackers had vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared, leaving behind only wreckage and questions. 4,000 beings had died in the attack, but more than 45,000 had been evacuated successfully. Analysis of the evacuation data showed that Evacuation Center 3, where James and the other humans had coordinated efforts, had the highest survival rate of any center on the station, and it was the only center where the evacuation had been completed successfully before the final destruction. James was summoned to a meeting on the rescue ship's bridge. The first speaker was there, or rather a holographic projection of them, transmitted from a Council flagship elsewhere in the system. Thexelar was present, as were Gorseth and several other senior Council members. James felt nervous until he realized that many of these were the same beings who had been in the overcrowded pod with him. Captain Chen, the first speaker began, their energy form pulsing with colors James couldn't quite interpret. The Council has reviewed the reports from the attack. We have concluded that humanity's actions during the crisis were exemplary. You and your people showed remarkable courage and organizational ability. But there is another matter we must discuss. James's heart sank. Here it comes, he thought. They're going to say we violated protocols by bringing the animals, that we endangered the evacuation. Your pets, the first speaker continued, and James braced himself. They played a crucial role in the evacuation. Our analysts have reviewed all available footage and testimony. In every location where humans were present with their companion animals, the evacuation proceeded more smoothly. Panic was reduced. Organization was maintained. Lives were saved. We, the Council, have misunderstood the nature of these creatures and their role in your society. Thexlar stepped forward. His wings folded in a posture James had learned indicated respect. Captain Chen, I personally witnessed your animal Max demonstrate intelligence, empathy, and courage during the crisis. He protected my daughter. He helped calm dozens of beings. And I have learned from my daughter that she wishes to meet him again, to thank him properly. She has asked me to inquire if humans ever allow others to interact with their pets. James felt a smile spreading across his face, despite his exhaustion. Yes, Ambassador, Max would be honored to meet your daughter again. He's very friendly. Gorseth rumbled forward, his massive form somehow seeming less intimidating than before. The Orthani pride themselves on efficiency, on eliminating all waste from our society. But I have learned in the past days that we eliminated something important long ago. We forgot that sentient beings are not machines. We require more than food and purpose. We require connection, comfort, and yes, even love. Your pets provide these things. They are not inefficient. They are essential. The first speaker pulsed with a warm golden color. The Council wishes to formally apologize to humanity for our mockery of your cultural practices regarding animal companionship. We were wrong. Furthermore, the Council is prepared to vote on humanity's full membership application immediately, without the previously scheduled waiting period. All species present have indicated they will vote in favor. James felt tears stinging his eyes. Thank you, first speaker. On behalf of humanity, I accept your apology, and I look forward to Earth taking its place among the galactic community. The days that followed were busy ones. A new temporary station was established while engineers planned the construction of a permanent replacement for the one destroyed in the attack. Humanity was officially welcomed as a full member of the Galactic Council in a ceremony that was, by necessity, less grand than originally planned, but no less meaningful. This time, when James stood before the assembled species, Max was at his side, and no one laughed. In fact, several ambassadors specifically requested to meet the dog who had become a symbol of humanity's heroism. But the story didn't end with the council vote. Something unexpected began to happen in the weeks after the attack. Aliens started asking questions about pets. Real questions, not mocking ones. They wanted to know how the bond between humans and animals formed. They wanted to understand how a creature without language could provide such comfort and assistance. Some even asked if it was possible for non-humans to develop similar relationships with Earth animals. Elena found herself leading an impromptu seminar for a group of Velcrin scholars who were fascinated by the concept of animal companionship. Luna sat on the table as Elena explained how cats had lived alongside humans for thousands of years, how they had helped control pests and provided companionship in return for food and shelter. The scholars took detailed notes, their antennae twitching with interest. One of them, a young researcher named Zilth, asked, "But how did you know which animals would make good companions? Surely not every species is suitable." Elena smiled and gestured to Luna, who was now grooming herself with complete disregard for her audience. Trial and error over thousands of years. Humans domesticated many species, but some formed closer bonds than others. Dogs, cats, horses, birds, even fish and reptiles. Each offers something different. Dogs are loyal and active. Cats are independent but affectionate. Birds can learn to communicate. The key is that the animal chooses the relationship too. We don't force it. Remarkable, Zilt murmured. The Velcrin eliminated all non-sentient life from our worlds 3,000 years ago. We deemed them unnecessary. But now I wonder what we lost in that decision. Similar conversations were happening throughout the temporary station. David found himself explaining the intelligence of dogs to a group of Orthani engineers who were studying the animals' problem-solving abilities. Gorseth himself attended one of these sessions, watching in fascination as David's beagle, Charlie, successfully navigated a maze to find hidden treats. The animal remembers the path, Gorseth observed. It learns from experience. And see there, it uses its sense of smell to detect the reward before it can see it. Remarkable efficiency in a compact biological form. David couldn't help but laugh. Charlie's not just efficient, Ambassador. He's also fun. Watch this. He pulled out a tennis ball and threw it down the corridor. Charlie took off after it with obvious joy, retrieved it, and brought it back with his tail wagging furiously. David threw it again, and Charlie repeated the performance with the same enthusiasm. Why does he do this? One of the Orthani engineers asked. He has already retrieved the ball once. The task is complete. Why does he wish to repeat a completed task? Because it makes him happy, David explained. And it makes me happy to see him happy. That's the point. Not everything has to be about efficiency or purpose. Sometimes joy itself is the purpose. The engineer's trunk-like appendages twisted in a way that David had learned indicated confusion mixed with contemplation. Joy as a purpose in itself. The Orthani do not have a word for this concept. We experience satisfaction in completing tasks, but joy for its own sake? This is foreign to us. But the most surprising development came from an unexpected source. The Zorgothi, the liquid metal species who had been among the most dismissive of pets, sent a delegation to request a formal meeting with James. Their ambassador, a being named Flux, rippled with patterns that James's translator identified as nervousness. Captain Chen, the Zorgothi collective wishes to make a request that is difficult for us, Flux began. Our species exists in a state of constant individual isolation. We cannot touch each other without risking merging, which would mean the death of individual consciousness. We maintain distance from all beings. But watching your Max, watching how he provides comfort through physical contact, we wonder if it might be possible for some of us to experience this. James was startled by the request. You want a pet? We want to understand if the companionship you describe is possible for us. The Zorgothi have existed for 10 million years. We are one of the oldest species in the Council, but we have always been alone, even among our own kind. The concept of touch, of comfort through physical presence, is alien to us. Yet we find ourselves drawn to it after witnessing its effects during the crisis. James thought carefully before responding. Dogs are adaptable, Ambassador. If a Zorgothi truly wants to try forming a bond with a dog, I think it could work, but it has to be genuine. You can't fake the emotional connection. The dog will know. Over the next few weeks, a small group of Zorgothi volunteers began spending time with dogs from the human delegation. The sessions were supervised and carefully monitored. At first, the results were unclear. The Zorgothi struggled to understand the dog's body language and vocalizations. The dogs, for their part, seemed confused by beings who had no scent and whose forms constantly shifted. But gradually, something unexpected happened. A young Zorgothi named Flo formed a connection with a golden retriever named Sunny. The two could often be found together in the station's gardens, Flo's metallic form reflecting sunlight from the station's lighting system, while Sunny dozed contentedly nearby. It is strange, Flo told James during one of his checkups on the program. "I do not understand most of what Sonny communicates, but I find that I do not need to. His presence is calming. When he rests near me, I experience something I have never felt before. I believe it is what you call peace." News of these experiments spread quickly through the galactic community. Soon, representatives from dozens of species were inquiring about the possibility of forming similar bonds with Earth animals. The Council's xenobiologists began working with human experts to determine which species might be compatible with which animals, and under what circumstances these relationships could be safely developed. But not everyone was pleased with these developments. A faction within the Council, led by a species called the Hixtar, began to push back against what they called the contamination of galactic culture with primitive Earth practices. The Hixtar were an insectoid species known for their rigid adherence to tradition and their belief in the supremacy of logic over emotion. Their ambassador, Krextar, gave a speech before the Council that was designed to stop the growing interest in pets. "Members of the Council, I urge you to see reason," Krextar's translated voice echoed through the chamber. "Yes, the humans and their animals performed admirably during the recent crisis, but this does not mean we should adopt their practices wholesale. The keeping of non-sentient creatures as companions is a crutch, a way to avoid developing proper emotional control. It is beneath us as advanced species to rely on animals for comfort when we should be strong enough to stand alone." James listened to the speech from the gallery, Max at his side. He felt anger rising, but forced himself to remain calm. The speech continued for nearly an hour, laying out all the arguments against pet ownership, resources wasted on animal care, time lost to animal maintenance, the risk of disease transmission, the ethical concerns of keeping other species in captivity. Krextar was eloquent and logical, and James could see that some council members were nodding along. When Krextar finished, the first speaker opened the floor for responses. James requested permission to speak and was granted it. He walked to the speaker's platform with Max, and this time the dog's presence felt like a statement in itself. The chamber fell silent as James began to speak. "Ambassador Krextar makes valid points about efficiency and logic," James began, his voice steady. "The Hixtar are known throughout the galaxy for their rational approach to all problems. I respect that, but I would like to address the Council on what was learned during the recent crisis, not just from the evacuation, but from the weeks that followed." James paused, gathering his thoughts. Max sat beside him, perfectly calm, a living example of what James was about to describe. "When the attack came, we were all afraid. Fear is not limited to humans. Every species in that station felt it. Fear is a survival mechanism, coded into our biology by evolution. It keeps us alive, but unchecked, it can also kill us. That day, fear could have caused a stampede that killed hundreds before the attackers destroyed a single system." He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many representatives as he could. Pets didn't stop the fear. They transformed it. They gave beings something to focus on outside their own panic. Ambassador Krextar calls this a crutch. I call it a tool, one that saved thousands of lives. Fexlar stood, his wings spread in a gesture of support. "Captain Chen speaks truth. I was there. I saw it. Without the calming influence of the human animals, far fewer of us would have survived." Krextar's mandibles clicked in irritation. A single incident does not justify wholesale adoption of inefficient practices. Yes, the animals were useful in that specific crisis, but what about the decades between crises? What about the resources spent on their care during times of peace? James nodded, acknowledging the point. "Let me tell you about a study done on Earth 50 years ago. Researchers found that humans who live with pets have lower stress levels, lower blood pressure, and live longer on average than those without. They recover from illness faster. They report higher life satisfaction. The resources spent on pet care are returned many times over in improved health and well-being. That's not inefficiency, that's investment. Anecdotal evidence, Krextar retorted. Human studies applied to human biology. Then let's talk about the Zorgathi, James continued. Flo has been living with a dog named Sunny for 3 weeks now. Zorgathi medical monitors show that Flo's neural patterns have stabilized in ways that Zorgathi physicians have never seen before. Flo reports experiencing emotions that Zorgathi previously lacked names for. And Flo's productivity in their assigned tasks has increased by 17%. That's not anecdotal, that's measurable improvement. A murmur ran through the chamber. The Zorgathi delegation rippled with patterns that suggested surprise and interest. Apparently, this data hadn't been shared widely yet. The first speaker pulsed with a color that suggested curiosity. Is this true? The Zorgathi delegation, can you confirm? The Zorgathi ambassador, Flux, rose to speak. It is true, first speaker. We have been studying the effects carefully. 5 Zorgathi have now formed bonds with human animals. All 5 show similar improvements in emotional regulation and task performance. We were planning to present this data formally next month, but since Captain Chen has mentioned it, I can confirm the results. James pressed his advantage. The question before this council isn't whether pets are efficient in a narrow sense. The question is whether improving the mental health, emotional stability, and quality of life of galactic citizens is a worthy goal. Because if it is, then pets are not just efficient, they're essential. Gorseth rose from his platform, his massive form commanding attention. The Orthani have also been conducting research. We have studied the humans and their animals extensively. What we have learned troubles us deeply, but not in the way Ambassador Krextar might think. We are troubled because we realized what we lost when we eliminated animals from our world. We have been proud of our efficiency, of our focus on production and logic. But our studies show that Orthani suffer from higher rates of what you humans call depression. We experience emotional isolation. We have the highest suicide rate of any council species. We thought this was simply the price of advancement, but now we wonder if we paid a price we didn't have to pay. The chamber fell silent. The Orthani were known for their stoicism, their refusal to show weakness. For Gorseth to admit such vulnerability before the entire council was unprecedented. James felt a surge of respect for the ambassador's courage. I am not saying that animals would solve all Orthani problems, Gorseth continued, but the humans have shown us that there are different kinds of strength. The strength to be vulnerable, to form connections, to accept help from others, even from creatures we might consider beneath us. This is a strength the Orthani have forgotten. Perhaps it is time we remembered. Elena stood from the human delegation section, Luna in her arms as always. May I speak, first speaker? Permission was granted, and Elena approached the platform. I want to address something Ambassador Krextar said about ethical concerns. He's right that we should think about the ethics of keeping animals. On Earth, we've had long debates about this. Some humans believe all animals should be wild and free, but the truth is more complicated. Luna meowed, and Elena stroked her gently before continuing. Many of our pets are domesticated species that have evolved alongside humans for thousands of years. Dogs descended from wolves, but they're not wolves anymore. They're a species that exists in partnership with humans. Take them away from us, and they would struggle to survive. They're adapted to life with humans. The same is true for cats, for horses, for many other species. The relationship is mutual. We provide food, shelter, and care. They provide companionship, assistance, and love. Both sides benefit. But what of the animal's choice? Krextar demanded. How can a non-sentient creature consent to such an arrangement? Elena smiled. Luna makes her choice every day. The door to my quarters is often open. She could leave any time she wants, but she stays. She seeks out my company. She sleeps on my bed. She purrs when I pet her. These are all choices she makes. The same is true for dogs and most other pets. If they were truly unhappy, they would show it. Animals may not have language, but they communicate clearly enough. James watched as the council members processed this information. He could see minds changing, perspectives shifting, but he also knew that Krextar and the Hixtar faction weren't going to give up easily. The debate continued for hours, with representatives from dozens of species weighing in. Some supported the growing acceptance of pets. Others expressed concerns about logistics, resources, and cultural contamination. Finally, the first speaker called for order. This debate could continue for days, but we have other matters to address. I propose the following compromise. The Council will not mandate or ban the keeping of animal companions. Each species will decide for themselves whether to explore this practice. However, the Council will establish a research committee to study the effects of human-style animal companionship across different species. This committee will include human experts, xenobiologists, and representatives from any species wishing to participate. After one standard year, the committee will report their findings, and we will revisit this discussion with more data. All in favor? The vote was overwhelmingly in favor. Even Krextar voted yes, though James suspected it was more about not wanting to appear obstructionist than genuine support. As the council moved on to other business, James returned to his seat in the gallery. Max licked his hand, and James felt the familiar comfort of that simple gesture. Elena leaned over and whispered, "We did it. We actually changed their minds." James nodded, but he knew the real work was just beginning. The research committee would need human expertise, guidance, and patience. Many species would try forming bonds with animals and fail at first. There would be setbacks, accidents, and misunderstandings. But for the first time since arriving at the station, James felt genuine hope that humanity's place in the galactic community would be not just accepted, but valued for what made them unique. The year that followed transformed the galactic community in ways no one could have predicted. The research committee, formally named the Interspecies Companionship Initiative, became one of the most active and well-funded projects in Council history. Humans found themselves in the unusual position of being teachers rather than students, sharing thousands of years of accumulated wisdom about animal care, training, and bonding. James was appointed as the human liaison to the initiative, a role that kept him busier than he had ever been. He spent his days consulting with alien researchers, mediating disputes about proper animal care, and occasionally dealing with mishaps when species tried to apply their own cultural frameworks to pets without understanding the nuances involved. Max became something of a celebrity, appearing in educational materials and demonstrations across the galactic net. One memorable incident involved a group of Velcrin who, in their enthusiasm, tried to give their newly acquired puppies the same type of high-frequency light bath that Velcrin used for cleaning themselves. The puppies were unharmed but traumatized, and James had to spend hours explaining that different species had different needs. The Velcrin were mortified by their mistake and became some of the most careful and attentive pet owners in the galaxy as a result. Elena led a team focused specifically on cat-alien interactions. It turned out that cats, with their independent nature and clear boundaries, were ideal companions for several species that found dogs too energetic or demanding. The Chishari in particular took to cats with surprising enthusiasm. Their careful, methodical nature meshed well with feline temperaments, and soon it was common to see Chishari diplomats with cats draped across their shoulders like living scarves. David specialized in working with the Orthani, helping them understand the more active, playful aspects of pet ownership. It was challenging work. The Orthani had spent millennia suppressing anything they deemed frivolous, and learning to play with a dog went against everything in their culture. But slowly, David helped them understand that play wasn't frivolous. It was a form of communication, a way of building bonds, and a release valve for stress. He spent hours with Gorseth and a border collie named Scout, teaching the massive ambassador how to play fetch, how to read a dog's body language, how to understand that a wagging tail meant happiness and flattened ears meant fear. The first time Gorseth successfully played with Scout, the ambassador's trunk-like appendages trembling with what could only be described as joy, several observers reported that they witnessed tears forming in the Orthani's eyes. Orthani did not cry, according to all known biology, but apparently they could under the right circumstances. The Zorgathi program expanded rapidly. What had started with Flo and Sunny became a movement within Zorgathi culture. The ability to experience physical comfort and touch, even if only through an intermediary creature, was revolutionary for a species that had lived in isolation for millions of years. Zorgathi psychologists reported dramatic decreases in the mental health issues that had plagued their species. The Zorgathi Council formally requested that Earth provide breeding pairs of several dog breeds so they could establish their own breeding programs. It was the first time in galactic history that a species had requested to import non-sentient life to their homeworld. But the most surprising development came from an unexpected source. The Hickstar, who had been the most vocal opponents of the pet initiative, quietly approached James 6 months into the program. Krekstar himself led the delegation, his mandibles clicking in what James had learned was embarrassment. Captain Chen, the Hickstar Collective would like to inquire about the possibility of establishing a small pilot program for animal companionship, Krekstar said, his translator giving his voice an appropriately humble tone. James managed to keep his surprise off his face. "Of course, Ambassador. May I ask what changed your mind?" "Data," Krekstar replied simply. "The Hickstar value logic and evidence above all else. The evidence from the past 6 months is overwhelming. Every species that has embraced the companionship initiative reports measurable improvements in mental health, productivity, and social cohesion. To ignore this data because of philosophical objections would be illogical. The Hickstar may be rigid, but we are not foolish." James smiled and reached down to scratch Max behind the ears. "I appreciate your honesty, Ambassador. Let's talk about what kind of animals might work well for the Hickstar. Your species is insectoid, correct? You might find that smaller animals like rabbits or guinea pigs would be a good starting point. They're gentle, relatively easy to care for, and very affectionate once they bond with someone." The conversation led to a comprehensive program for the Hickstar. It turned out that the rigid, logical Hickstar were actually excellent pet owners once they understood the rules and expectations. They created detailed care schedules, optimized nutrition plans, and meticulously maintained health records. Their pets thrived under such attentive care, even if the Hickstar took a while to understand the less logical aspects of the relationship, like why a rabbit might want to cuddle even when it wasn't scheduled cuddle time. As the year drew to a close, the research committee prepared its final report. The data was comprehensive and undeniable. Across every species that had participated in the initiative, there were measurable improvements in mental health, decreases in stress-related illnesses, and increases in reported life satisfaction. Productivity hadn't decreased as Krekstar had feared. In fact, it had increased slightly across the board. The hypothesis was that happier, less stressed workers were more effective workers. The report also included recommendations for each species, detailing which types of animals were most compatible with their biology and culture, what care requirements were necessary, and what ethical guidelines should be followed. It was a masterwork of xenobiological research, and it bore the signatures of hundreds of researchers from dozens of worlds. The day of the final presentation arrived. The council chamber was packed with representatives, researchers, and observers. James sat in the human delegation section with Max at his side, Elena and Luna nearby, David with Charlie a few seats away. The temporary station had become a permanent home of sorts, rebuilt and renamed Unity Station to symbolize the cooperation that had emerged from tragedy. The first speaker floated to the center of the chamber, their energy form pulsing with what James had learned to recognize as satisfaction. Members of the Council, honored guests, we gather today to receive the final report of the Interspecies Companionship Initiative. In 1 year, we have learned more about ourselves and each other than in the previous century. We have discovered that the humans, whom some initially mocked for their attachment to animals, possessed wisdom that we lacked. We are better for having learned from them. The lead researcher, a Velcrin named Illith, who had become one of James's closest friends over the past year, presented the findings. The data was displayed on massive screens around the chamber, showing graphs, charts, and statistics that told the story of transformation. Illith's voice was steady and professional, but James could hear the excitement beneath it. In conclusion, Illith said, the committee unanimously recommends that the Galactic Council formally recognize animal companionship as a beneficial practice for all species capable of forming such bonds. We further recommend the establishment of a permanent council office dedicated to facilitating and regulating the ethical treatment and trade of companion animals. Finally, we recommend that Earth be formally recognized as the Galactic Authority on Animal Companionship, with human experts serving as advisors to any species seeking to establish such programs. The chamber erupted in discussion. James listened as representatives from dozens of worlds spoke about their experiences with the initiative, about the changes they had witnessed in themselves and their people. Even species that hadn't yet participated expressed interest in learning more. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Every single council member voted in favor of the recommendations. As the formal session ended and delegates began to mingle, James found himself surrounded by aliens wanting to share their stories about their pets. A Kiksari diplomat showed him pictures of her cat's kittens. A Orthani engineer described how his dog had helped him through a difficult period after losing a colleague. A Zorgathi scientist explained with genuine wonder how her golden retriever had taught her what it meant to feel truly connected to another being. Vexlar approached with his daughter, a young Velcrin whose wings had fully healed from her injuries during the evacuation. Captain Chen, my daughter has something she wishes to say to Max. The young Velcrin knelt down to Max's level, her antennae waving gently. Thank you, Max, for saving me. My parent has told me that you protected me when I was hurt. I will never forget your kindness. Max, in his infinite wisdom, simply wagged his tail and licked the young Velcrin's face. She giggled, a sound like wind chimes, and Thexlar's wings spread in an expression of joy that needed no translation. Later that evening, the human delegation hosted a celebration in their quarters. It was a modest affair by galactic standards, but aliens from dozens of species attended, many bringing their newly acquired pets. The sight of so many different beings, each with their own companion animal, filled James with a profound sense of accomplishment. They had done more than just gain acceptance for humanity's cultural practices. They had shared something fundamental about what it meant to be human, and in doing so, had helped other species discover new aspects of themselves. Gorseth arrived with Scout, the border collie who had taught the Orthani ambassador how to play. The massive alien was carrying a small device that he presented to James with great ceremony. Captain Chen, the Orthani Collective wishes to present you with this token of our gratitude. It is a cultural artifact from our homeworld, created over 10,000 years ago, before we eliminated animals from our society. It depicts an Orthani youngling with a creature that we now believe was similar to what you would call a dog. We had forgotten this part of our history. You helped us remember. James accepted the gift with reverence, examining the intricate carving that showed an ancient Orthani child embracing a four-legged creature. This is beautiful, Ambassador, and important. Thank you for sharing it with me. Elena joined them, Luna perched on her shoulder. It makes you wonder what other species have forgotten about their own pasts. How many civilizations eliminated their companion animals in the name of progress, never realizing what they were losing? Many, I suspect, Gorseth replied. The Council archives contain references to dozens of species that once kept animals for non-food purposes. The practice was always dismissed as primitive behavior that advanced societies abandon. But perhaps we were wrong. Perhaps in our rush to become more advanced, we forgot how to be whole. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the door. Krextar had arrived, and he was carrying a small cage containing what looked like a rabbit with unusual coloring. The Hixtar ambassador approached James with careful steps, his mandibles clicking nervously. "Captain Chen, I wanted you to meet Patch. She is my companion. The name is because of the patches of different colors in her fur. Is this an acceptable name?" James couldn't help but smile at the uncertainty in Krextar's voice. The alien who had argued so forcefully against pets just months ago was now seeking approval for his rabbit's name. "It's a perfect name, Ambassador. How are you two getting along?" Krextar's mandibles made a gesture that James had learned indicated contentment. "She is most illogical. She demands attention at unpredictable times. She refuses to eat certain foods even when they are nutritionally optimal. She makes messes that serve no purpose. And yet when I hold her and feel her warmth, when I hear the small sounds she makes, I experience something I cannot quite quantify. The closest translation in your language would be happiness, pure, uncomplicated happiness." "That's what pets do," Elena said gently. "They remind us that not everything needs to be quantified or understood. Sometimes it's enough to just feel." As the evening continued, James found himself in conversation with the first speaker, who had taken the unusual step of attending a private gathering. The energy being pulsed with warm colors as they observed the mingling of species, all united by their shared experience of animal companionship. "Captain Chen, humanity has given the galaxy a remarkable gift," the first speaker said. "Not just the animals themselves, but a different way of thinking about relationships, about efficiency, about what makes life worth living. The Council has been operating on certain assumptions for thousands of years. You challenge those assumptions, not with arguments or force, but with simple demonstration. You showed us a better way." James felt humbled by the praise. "We didn't set out to change the galaxy, first speaker. We just wanted to keep our pets." "Sometimes the most profound changes come from the simplest desires," the first speaker replied. "Your determination to maintain your cultural identity, even when mocked and pressured to conform, preserved something precious. And when crisis came, that very thing you fought to keep became the tool that saved lives. There is a lesson in that for all of us." The first speaker paused, their form pulsing with a color James hadn't seen before. "I must share something with you, Captain. It is not widely known, but the first speakers are not the original form of my species. Millions of years ago, my ancestors were corporeal beings, much like the Orthani or Velcrin. We evolved beyond physical form, achieving a state of pure energy. We believe this made us superior, transcendent. But in becoming energy, we lost something. We can no longer touch, can no longer feel physical sensation. We eliminated that aspect of ourselves in the name of advancement." James listened intently as the first speaker continued. "Watching your species and your pets, seeing the comfort that comes from simple physical contact, I wonder if my people made a mistake. We cannot undo our evolution. We are what we are. But perhaps we can learn from your example to value what we have lost, to remember that transcendence sometimes means leaving behind things worth keeping." Before James could respond, an alarm sounded throughout the station. Not the emergency klaxons from the attack, but a different tone, one that signaled an incoming priority message. The celebration came to an abrupt halt as everyone's personal communicators activated simultaneously. James pulled out his device and read the message with growing concern. It was from Earth. The unknown attackers who had destroyed the original Council station had appeared in the Sol system. They had bypassed all early warning systems and were approaching Earth with clear hostile intent. The message was hours old due to the distance. Whatever was happening was already underway. James felt his blood run cold. His home planet, billions of humans, the birthplace of humanity and all their companion animals, was under attack. Around him, the other humans had received the same message. Faces went pale. Hands trembled. Several people started crying. Max pressed against James's leg, sensing his distress. The first speaker's form turned a deep crimson. All Council vessels will proceed immediately to the Sol system. Earth is a Council member world. An attack on Earth is an attack on the Council itself. We will not allow this to stand. But James knew it was too late. Even at maximum speed, the Council fleet would take days to reach Earth. The message from Earth was already hours old. Whatever was going to happen had probably already happened. He thought about his sister on Earth, his friends, the millions of pet owners who had trusted him to represent humanity's interests among the stars. Had he failed them all? The celebration transformed into a crisis center. Council representatives coordinated with their governments. Military leaders planned response strategies. Scientists analyzed what little data they had about the attackers. But everyone knew they were too far away to help. James stood at the window, looking out at the stars, Max beside him, and felt utterly helpless. Then David approached, his beagle Charlie in his arms. "Captain, I just received a message from my brother. He's in Earth's Defense Force. The attackers came, but something strange happened. When they got close to Earth, they broke off their attack and left. They just turned around and went back into quantum fold space without firing a shot." James turned, hardly daring to hope. "Are you sure? Is Earth safe?" David nodded, his face a mixture of relief and confusion. "Earth is safe. The attackers left. But according to my brother, they received a strange transmission from the attacking ships just before they departed. It was a single word in a language that matched no database. The word was translated as something like protected or guardian. Then they left." The news spread quickly through the gathered crowd. Earth was safe, but no one understood why. The attackers had been willing to destroy a council station and kill thousands, but they had turned away from Earth without a fight. It made no sense. James's mind raced, trying to find an explanation, but came up empty. Over the next few days, as the Council fleet made its way to Sol system, more information trickled in. The attackers had approached Earth with the same formation and tactics they had used at the station. They had been preparing to strike. But then something had changed. Long-range sensors from Earth's defense satellites showed that the attacking ships had performed detailed scans of Earth before departing. They had been looking for something, and apparently, they had found it. When the Council fleet finally arrived at Earth, James was aboard the flagship with Max, eager to get home and understand what had happened. The planet looked beautiful from orbit, blue and green and white, teeming with life. He could see the lights of cities, the patterns of agriculture, the vast stretches of wilderness. And somewhere down there, millions of pets were living their lives alongside their human companions, completely unaware of how close they had come to destruction. Earth's defense coordinator, Admiral Patricia Zhang, came aboard the flagship to brief the Council. She was a stern woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much combat. But even she seemed shaken by what had occurred. "We don't have a complete understanding of what happened," Admiral Zhang began, displaying tactical data on the view screen. The attacking force consisted of 47 vessels of unknown design. They approached Earth in an attack formation consistent with the formation used during the station attack. We scrambled every defense platform and ship we had, but we knew we were outmatched. Based on the station's combat data, we estimated we had maybe 10 minutes before they broke through our defenses and began orbital bombardment. She paused, her jaw tightening. But they didn't attack. Instead, they began scanning Earth with technology we couldn't identify. The scans were incredibly detailed, penetrating deep into the atmosphere, mapping the surface. This went on for approximately 7 minutes. Then, all at once, they stopped. They transmitted that single word we told you about, and then they left through quantum fold space. We have no idea where they went or if they'll come back. The first speaker's form pulsed with confused colors. What could they have been scanning for? What did they find on Earth that made them leave? Admiral Zhang shook her head. We've been analyzing the scan data they used. It wasn't looking at our military installations or our cities. It was scanning for biological signatures. Specifically, it was identifying different species of life on the planet. The scans concentrated on areas with high animal diversity. James felt a strange, prickling sensation on the back of his neck. Animals? They were scanning for animals? Not just any animals, the Admiral clarified. When we ran the scan patterns through our computers, we found something interesting. The attackers were specifically identifying domesticated species: dogs, cats, horses, livestock, pets. They spent extra time scanning areas with high concentrations of companion animals, like cities and suburbs. The implications hung in the air like a physical weight. Elena spoke what everyone was thinking. They left because they found pets on Earth, because they found our relationship with animals. Gorseth rumbled forward, his massive form seeming smaller somehow. But why? Why would the presence of companion animals cause them to abandon their attack? No one had an answer. The mystery deepened over the following weeks as Earth and the Council worked together to analyze every scrap of data from the encounter. Xenolinguists studied the transmitted word, trying to extract meaning from context. Military analysts examined the attackers' behavior patterns. Scientists proposed dozens of theories, each more speculative than the last. Then, 3 months after the Earth incident, the attackers returned. This time they appeared near a distant council world called Terex Prime, home to the Terax, a reptilian species known for their military prowess. The Terax had ignored the interspecies companionship initiative, seeing pets as beneath their warrior culture. Their world had no domesticated animals, no companion species, nothing but the Terax themselves and the wild creatures they hunted for sport. The attack was swift and brutal. Unlike Earth, the attackers showed no mercy to Terex Prime. They destroyed the orbital defenses in minutes and began a systematic bombardment of the surface. By the time the Council fleet arrived, millions of Terax were dead and the planet was burning. The attackers had vanished again, leaving only destruction. James watched the footage from Terex Prime with growing horror. This could have been Earth. This should have been Earth, by all logic. The attackers had been equally prepared to strike both worlds, but one world they had spared, and one they had destroyed. The only significant difference was the presence of companion animals on Earth. The Terax survivors, refugees taken aboard council ships, were devastated and confused. Their world had been strong, defended, proud, and they had been crushed like insects. A Terax military commander named Vex spoke with James in the days after the attack, his scales dulled with grief. "We mocked you humans for keeping pets," Vex said, his voice rough with emotion. "We said you were weak for loving creatures that could not fight beside you. Now my world burns, and yours does not. Perhaps we were the weak ones." James didn't know how to respond. What could he say? That pets had somehow saved Earth from destruction? It sounded absurd even in his own mind. Yet the evidence was there, stark and undeniable. Something about humanity's relationship with animals had caused the attackers to spare Earth while destroying Terex Prime. A council task force was assembled to investigate the connection. James found himself working with xenobiologists, military strategists, historians, and experts from a dozen fields, all trying to understand what they were dealing with. The task force reviewed every recorded encounter with the attackers, looking for patterns. They studied the scans the attackers had performed on Earth. They analyzed the single word transmitted before the attackers left. It was Illith, the Velcrin researcher who had led the companionship initiative, who made the breakthrough. She had been studying ancient council records, looking for any historical references to unknown hostile forces. Deep in the archives dating back nearly 1 million years, she found a fragmentary account from a species long extinct. The account described an encounter with beings they called the Guardians. The Guardians, according to the ancient text, were an extremely advanced species that had existed long before the current council. They had seeded life across the galaxy and watched over it like protective parents. But they had one absolute rule. Any species that proved itself capable of love and care for other life forms was protected. Any species that saw other life only as resources to exploit was culled. The text was incomplete and difficult to translate, but Illith's interpretation sent shockwaves through the task force. Could the attackers be these Guardians? Were they testing species to see if they were worthy of continued existence? It seemed impossible, like something from ancient mythology, but it fit the facts better than any other theory. James presented the findings to the full council. If this theory is correct, then the attackers aren't attackers at all. They're judges. They scan worlds to see how the inhabitants treat other forms of life. Species that demonstrate care and compassion for other creatures are spared. Species that don't are eliminated. Krextar, his rabbit Patch sitting in his lap, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Then the Companion Animal Initiative wasn't just about improving our quality of life. It may have saved us from extinction. Not all of us, Vex said quietly. The Terrax commander had been invited to the session as a representative of his shattered people. My world had no pets. We saw animals as things to hunt, to use, to dominate, and now we pay the price. The council chamber fell silent. The implications were staggering. Humanity's stubborn insistence on keeping pets, the practice that had been mocked and derided, had inadvertently saved them from a threat they didn't even know existed. And by sharing that practice with other species, humans had potentially saved the entire galactic community. We can't know for certain that this theory is correct, the first speaker said carefully, but we also can't afford to assume it's wrong. If the Guardians, or whatever we choose to call them, are testing us, then every species in this chamber needs to demonstrate care for other life. Not because it's efficient or logical, but because our survival may depend on it. The Council's response was immediate and comprehensive. The Interspecies Companionship Initiative, which had been a voluntary program, became a Council priority. Breeding programs were established on dozens of worlds. Human-animal experts were dispatched across the galaxy to help species develop appropriate relationships with companion animals. Even the most resistant cultures began to reconsider their positions when faced with the alternative. The Terrax survivors were among the first to embrace the new imperative. Vex himself took on a dog, a German shepherd much like Max, whom he named Hope. James helped train Vex in proper dog care, and watching the hardened warrior learn to be gentle with the animal was a profound experience. Vex's scales, which had been dull with grief, gradually regained some of their luster as Hope helped him process his trauma. I was taught that strength meant domination, Vex told James during one training session. Hope was lying at the Terrax's feet, content and trusting despite his alien appearance. That a warrior showed power by conquering, but Max saved your world through love, not conquest. Hope is teaching me a new kind of strength, the strength to protect rather than dominate, to nurture rather than destroy. My people will rebuild, and when we do, we will be different, better. The months turned into years. The Guardians, as everyone now called them, were not seen again, but their presence hung over the galaxy like a distant star, always there even when not visible. Species that had eliminated animals from their worlds began the slow process of reintroduction. Cloning programs brought back extinct species. Careful breeding and domestication projects developed new companion animals suited to different alien biologies. James watched it all with a mixture of pride and humility. Humanity hadn't set out to save the galaxy. They had just wanted to keep their pets, to maintain a connection with other life that felt fundamental to who they were. But in doing so, they had preserved something that turned out to be far more important than anyone realized. They had demonstrated to the universe that humans understood the value of other life forms, that they could form bonds across species lines, that they could love without expecting logical returns on their investment. Max grew older during those years. His muzzle turned gray, his steps became slower, his hearing dimmed. James knew that their time together was limited, as it always was with pets. Dogs live such short lives compared to humans, and that had always been the tragedy of the relationship. But Max had lived a remarkable life. He had traveled to the stars, witnessed the birth of a new galactic order, and in his own way had helped save billions of lives. On a quiet evening in their quarters on Unity Station, James sat with Max, stroking the old dog's fur, as he had done countless times before. Elena was there with Luna, now also showing her age. David visited with Charlie, who was still energetic despite being 10 years old. They didn't talk much, just sat together with their pets, drawing comfort from their presence, as humans had done for thousands of years. "Do you think the Guardians are still watching?" Elena asked softly. James looked down at Max, whose tail gave a weak wag at the sound of his voice. "I think they never stopped. I think they've always been out there, checking on us, making sure we remember how to care for life. Maybe that's what Guardians do. They don't control or dominate, they just watch and protect, stepping in only when necessary." "Like Max," David said. "He doesn't control your life, Captain. He just watches over you, protects you in his own way, loves you without asking for anything in return. Maybe that's what the Guardians saw on Earth. Not just that we had pets, but that we understood what it meant to be guardians ourselves." James felt tears prick his eyes as Max sighed contentedly, his weight warm and familiar against James's leg. "Maybe that's the real lesson. Not that we should keep animals to save ourselves from judgment, but that caring for other life makes us better beings. The Guardians didn't spare Earth because we had pets. They spared us because having pets taught us compassion, responsibility, and love. Those are the qualities they were looking for." The conversation drifted to other topics, but James's mind stayed on that thought. Humanity had been mocked for keeping useless creatures, for wasting resources on animals that couldn't contribute to society in measurable ways. But those same creatures had taught humanity fundamental truths about empathy, about valuing life for its own sake, about finding joy in simple connections. And those truths had made humanity worthy of survival in ways that advanced technology and military might never could. 3 years after the Earth incident, the Council held a ceremony to commemorate the anniversary of humanity's admission to the galactic community. It was also a celebration of the Interspecies Companionship Initiative and its impact on galactic civilization. Representatives from every council species attended, and most brought their companion animals. The sight of hundreds of different species, each with their own unique pets, would have seemed absurd to James on that first day when he arrived with Max and faced mockery. Now it was normal, expected, celebrated. The first speaker addressed the assembled crowd, their energy form pulsing with warm, welcoming colors. 5 years ago, humanity joined the council with a request that seemed simple. Let them keep their pets. We laughed, we mocked. We saw their attachment to animals as a primitive weakness. But humanity persisted. They maintained their values despite our ridicule. And when crisis came, those values saved thousands of lives. When greater crisis came, those values saved an entire world. Now those values are helping to transform our civilization. The first speaker paused, allowing their words to sink in. Let this be a lesson to all of us. Advanced technology does not make a civilization great. Military power does not make a species worthy. What makes us great, what makes us worthy, is how we treat those who cannot fight back, who cannot speak for themselves, who exist at our mercy. The humans understood this. Their pets taught them. And now, because of them, we are all learning. James was called forward to receive a commendation on behalf of humanity. He walked to the center of the chamber with Max, the old dog moving slowly but with dignity. As James accepted the award, a holographic display activated, showing images from the past 5 years. The evacuation where pets had helped maintain calm. The research initiative that had brought species together. The programs that had spread companion animals across the galaxy. And finally, footage from Earth, showing the attacking ships departing without firing a shot. Captain James Chen and Max, his companion, represent the best of what humanity has to offer, the first speaker continued. They show us that strength comes in many forms, that love is not weakness, and that sometimes the most profound wisdom comes from the simplest relationships. The Council is honored to have humans among us, and we are grateful for the gift they have shared. The chamber erupted in applause, or the alien equivalents thereof. Thexelar's wings created patterns of light. Gorseth's trunk waved in circles. The Zorgothi rippled with brilliant colors. Even Krextar's mandibles clicked in appreciation. And through it all, Max sat calmly at James's side, just being himself, which had always been enough. After the ceremony, as aliens lined up to meet Max and thank James, Elena joined him with Luna. "We did something good here," she said. "Something important." James nodded, watching as a young Kixari child gently petted Max while her parents looked on with approval. A few years ago, such a scene would have been unthinkable. Now it was commonplace. We helped them remember how to care. In a galaxy of advanced technology and ancient civilizations, we reminded everyone that the most important things are often the simplest. "Do you think the Guardians will come back?" Elena asked. James considered the question. "Maybe, but I don't think they'll need to. Not for a long time. We've learned the lesson. Every species on this station, every world in the Council, they're all learning how to be guardians themselves. Of their pets, of each other, of life in all its forms. That's what the Guardians wanted to see, not perfection, but the capacity for growth, for compassion, for love." That night, James lay in bed with Max curled up beside him, as the old dog had done for years. He thought about everything that had happened since that first day when he stood before the Council and faced their mockery. He thought about the attack, the evacuation, the mystery of the Guardians. He thought about all the lives that had been changed, all the species that had discovered the joy of animal companionship. And he thought about Max, who had been with him through it all, loyal and loving, without ever asking why or questioning whether it made logical sense. "Thank you, boy," James whispered, scratching behind Max's ears. "For everything. For being my friend when I had no one else. For helping me through the hard times. For being brave when we needed bravery. For showing the galaxy what really matters." Max's tail thumped weakly against the bed, and James felt the familiar comfort of that simple gesture. In the end, that was what pets did. They reminded you that you weren't alone, that love existed, that simple joys mattered. They taught you to be better than you were, not through words or demands, but through their presence and their trust. They were, in every way that mattered, guardians of the soul. The galaxy had learned that lesson from humanity, but humanity had learned it first from creatures like Max. And maybe that was the true message of the Guardians, whoever they were and wherever they watched from. Love and care for life wasn't a weakness to be eliminated in the name of progress. It was the very thing that made progress worthwhile. It was what separated civilization from mere existence. It was what made beings worthy of the stars.